Hi, and welcome to this week's OSINT Curious Interview. This week, I am joined by my OSINT Curious colleagues, Micah and Christina. Hi.
Hello.
Hi,
And
everyone.
we are also joined by our special guest this week, namely Sarah Womer, who is also known as OSINT Unleashed. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, everyone.
So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. And before we dive into this interview, let me first introduce Sarah. So Sarah Womer, aka OSINT Unleashed on Twitter, she's an open source intelligence practitioner with over 20 years of experience as an OSINT tutor and teacher, production manager, researcher, editor, and analyst. So Sarah, she has a very, very impressive career, and we will also talk about this because I'm definitely interested in it. And Sarah, she, amongst many other things she done in the past, she also deployed with the Coalition Provisional Authority during the invasion of Iraq in 2003 as a media analyst in Baghdad. And ever since, she has also worked in multiple other roles. And yeah, we are very glad to have you here today.
Thank you.
So I would kick off with the first question, Sarah. So can you tell us a little bit about your career path? So how did everything start? And maybe you can also talk about how did you get into OSINT? So what's your, tell us a bit about your career.
Well, it started off actually being interested in internet research when I was in college, and I was a research assistant to one of my professors. And I got very interested in doing online research. And then I got very interested into intercultural communications in the Middle East and very interested into Middle East politics. So I ended up being a Middle East analyst after I was a journalist for a short time in the Middle East, and also did some Arabic lessons in the Middle East. But when I was working as a Middle East analyst for a defense company, we had September the 11th, 2001 hit. And when that happened, I was looking at negative messaging and negative content online. And so I started going to a lot of terrorist websites. And so I went to a lot of terrorist websites. And that's actually how I got into OSINT, because in addition to looking at like audience and sentiment analysis, I was doing things like looking at the metadata or looking at where the IP of the website went to, or who owned the domain, or was there a IBAN number on the site and what it linked to. So then I ended up doing that for several years. And I also did a couple of articles and presentations on it. One was for the Encyclopedia of World Terrorism that was from 1996 through 2002. I have a chapter in there on how terrorists use the internet. And that's actually how I first got into OSINT.
Wow, so that's very interesting, especially, I'm personally also very interested in terrorist use of the internet. And it's also great to hear. I've seen some of your work on Twitter as well in that direction. So I'm personally very interested in this topic. And can I also ask, when was the point when you realized that, there's a career path in this, for you that kind of like is suited for your interests and also your passion? So you mentioned you worked in journalism, is that correct? And then you figured out that I want to dive deeper into this terrorist use of the internet and learn more? Or how did this came about?
Well, the journalism thing was actually, that was in 1998. And then also in 95, I went and did, worked with a group of refugees doing some public affairs and communication stuff as a volunteer. But the interest in actual OSINT, that happened in 2001. Prior to that, though, when I was working as an analyst, as a defense contractor from 1999 to 2001, I was doing a lot of just research. but I think the turning point to actually making products that were of use to also the OSINT community would have been 2001.
2001. And can you tell us, what are you doing today? So
right now, I work with Kirby Plessis of Plessis Experts Network, Inc. And I also volunteer with IEEE SA Open. And then when I have a chance to, or when somebody actually asks me to, I volunteer doing OSINT, a variation of OSINT tradecraft for kids to teach them responsible digital citizenship and how to be safe online and how to do fact checking. So one of the things that I did before I moved, because I just recently moved, was I had a small group of youth that I was training in that, essentially just to give back to the community.
Oh, wow.
Do you do this regionally, or do you go to schools? How does that work? Because I think that's extremely useful for every community. And at least here in Europe, I don't think that parents know they have the option to teach their kids how to behave online and what OSINT means. So how did you initiate this, or how did you get involved?
Well, I first initiated it, or I tried to initiate it actually when I was in Japan. And that was in 2017 or 2016 or 2017. And at that point, when I was there, I offered it as a volunteer service on a base. But most of the people in the base were much more interested in like gymnastics class or soccer or sports. So it wasn't very popular at that time. But right before I left to my current location, I actually got a group of kids that were involved, and I put it under something called Cyber Salukis. And so
nice name.
I love
really nice.
I know it's silly, but I absolutely love Salukis. I have 2 rescued Salukis.
Oh, so. Wow.
Aww. Good. So you did the whole packaging, let's say, and you offered it as an option. Yeah, maybe we can use it.
I hope to re-offer it as an option here in Europe, because I'm sitting in Europe right now. And if that's something that you think would be of interest in here, I'd love to talk to you about it after the show.
Gladly, especially nowadays, I find it so important to have this conversation outside our OSINT circles.
Yeah, I think it's very important for youth. So,
oh yes.
I had an example actually before I came over here. There was a youth in my neighborhood where I lived in Texas who kept posting on SnapMap, and he was not password protecting his location, and he was smoking marijuana. And so anybody could go onto SnapMap and see him smoking marijuana and see the actual location of where he was smoking marijuana. So, one, he shouldn't have been doing that at all, but 2, he was definitely putting himself at risk with not understanding what he was doing on social media. And that impacts youth, I think, so much now, because they make one mistake and then they lose their college scholarship, or they don't get that job interview because somebody looks and says, oh, look what you did, 10 years ago online.
Yeah. Yes, it follows them down the road.
Yeah, that's, as Christina also said, that's such a big and very important topic and area. And it's, I mean, if we just look at the technologies and all these apps, that there are so many of them, and no one really reads where the data is stored or what happens to their data. And also people tend to forget that once you post something on the internet, it will remain there. So what is your experience with, telling youths about these issues? Are they receptive to it, or they don't want to hear it, or what is your experience?
Well, the trial that I had with the small group right before moving was actually very positive. They, I would think, were more into learning. So I showed them everything from how to get more definitive research for their school reports, like how to use Google Docs to narrow down their search to particular historical time. to how to teach their mom and dad to put the phone settings more secure. So I think, I mean, they really enjoyed it. I offered 5 classes and they kept asking for more. So before I left, I think I ended up doing like 10 or 11.
I think the newer generations are very interested because they use the internet all the time. And my mom is a teacher. We had some. She tells me about the cases in her school where somebody abused somebody else's social media to bully them, and the big mess that happens with researching the internet, what people put out there, but also cases of revenge porn. That the youth needs to be aware of, because that's another thing that can follow them down the road. So I think they are very willing to know, because they want to avoid problems, like everybody.
Yeah.
We all want to avoid problems that can come back and haunt us.
But just a quick one, maybe for a discussion here. How could you balance the, teaching youths these techniques to, for safeguarding purposes is very important, but at the same time, how can you avoid that they exploit the same tools and methods, for nefarious purposes like stalking, for instance? Question for everyone. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts on that are, historically the emphasis has been put on safety and security, on surveillance of the youth, and so and a sense of distrust, which is not giving an open level of communication between that youth and their trusted adults, who they're the people that they look up to. So instead of having a dialogue, a lot of times they're just kind of in a fishbowl. I mean, they're in a fishbowl from the time they wake up to the time they get home. They're on the fishbowl. And if their parents have the surveillance software, they're on a fishbowl from that. They're in a fishbowl because the school has it on a fishbowl. Walking out the front door, they're in a fishbowl because anybody can take a picture of them with a smartphone. So they're just consistently under this fishbowl. So I think that having an open channel where you teach them digital responsibility and show them the negative impacts of things. If you have a teen looking at porn, that's bad, because they're looking at human trafficking, but nobody might have explained to him, this is how human trafficking and luring is working online, and this is how you protect yourself. So you have to have that open dialogue with them. And then one of the other things that you can do that I've seen some youth cyber awareness websites recommend is to have a cyber contract with your kids, with the expectations of, this is how much time I'm going to spend online. I mean, time management in and of itself is an issue, right? So this is how much time I'm going to be online. These are the kinds of things I'm going to do online. If I violate my agreement, I lose my whatever device it is for X amount of time, and I'm agreeing to it and I'm signing it. But beyond that is to actually empower them to know how to protect themselves versus just someone else protecting them from surveillance. Because surveillance in and of itself is not protection.
I absolutely agree with what Sarah said, and I would have the same answer. Basically, yes, you can weaponize some of the information, but you need to have the dialogue and you need to have the security approach on it.
I think the important,
because otherwise,
go ahead.
Because otherwise they remain with a false idea of what happens on the internet and with their information.
I think one of the important pieces that you hit on for me was the responsibility piece. And I don't just think of the responsibility when working with my children or other people's children and teaching them what can be found online, but also when talking with people new to the world of OSINT, whether they're later in their career or young person, clients, talking about the responsibility for the techniques that we use, ethics, and other things that can be used on the internet. I think one of the best things is, just because something can be done doesn't mean that it should be done or that we will do it. And teaching kids this, as well as teaching just people in the community where those those lines are when we use this technique or when we see this on the internet is very important.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah.
Sarah, do you also work with schools? Is this part of like you go to schools and then teach them? Or do you know about schools doing this? Because when I remember when I went to school, I mean, there was nothing like that.
Was there internet, Laurent?
Yes, there was.
Currently, no, because I've just moved to a new location. But I mean, if a school came up and said, "Hey, you want to, do you want to come volunteer and do this, once a month?" Or I'd be like, "Absolutely, you betcha," because I really, really think it's important.
I absolutely agree. I mean, there are some subjects that can be, that can be stopped. Like I had to go through Latin, and I have no real use for this. And I wish I had something like computer science or something more technical.
Practical.
Yeah, exactly. But not Latin, honestly. Sorry for our listeners who like Latin and study it at the moment, but I found it so useless.
Yeah.
Latin really helps with your analytical thinking, though. Supposedly.
Yeah.
I mean, there are many arguments, but every person has the courses that they like and the ones that they absolutely dread. I still think it's very good to recommend, because I believe the school will not necessarily reach out or think about reaching out to us to go there, offer a class. I still feel, at least where I am, that you need to reach out to them. But I don't have that much experience with it yet here.
Yeah, but whenever I do have the opportunity, I do it. So
that's great.
Yeah,
so and it matters.
It's my little way of giving back. So.
Oh, that's really nice. And to our listeners, just to point out, especially the podcast listeners, make sure to follow Sarah on Twitter. Her handle is @UnleashedOSINT, so everything together. And also, as she mentioned, she creates a newsletter. And if you want to sign up, you can find it here. Link is shown below. For podcast listeners, check out the description. Cool.
It's a news portal. It's the Plessis news portal, and I'm the content manager, and I do a lot of work on it.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you do on a daily basis. So how do you curate the news, and what sources do you use, and how do you try to keep up with the latest in OSINT? Maybe you can share some tips with us.
Well, I mean, there's such a big difference between OSINT and OSIF, isn't there? I mean, OSINT, you have a collection requirement. OSIF, you don't. So I try and look at what I think would be important global issues, or indirectly would be collection requirements. And in that sense, I make my own, and I put those into key terms. And then I set up things like RSS feeds. I go to different social media platforms like Discord and Twitter. And some of the social media platforms are nice, and some of them aren't so nice. And I don't limit myself just to one cultural lens either. Yeah. Because one of the things I found is that OSINTers from different areas look at OSINT. A lot of it's the same, but there's differences on everything from what is considered to be ethical to what is considered to be a good tool. So I will go look at I'll go look at foreign OSINT groups. Like there's a whole, I forget the name of the group, but there's a whole group in Gujarat, I think it's Gujarat, India. They have their own OSINT program at one of the universities there, where they're making rocking awesome software. So I'll go and look and see, what these dudes in India are making and how it can help the community. So I mean, I kind of take a big picture view and then go down.
Oh, that's interesting. But there were a couple of points The first one was the distinction between OSINT and OSIF, and that's a very important one. But I think most of the people, when they talk about OSINT, they generally talk about, all the tools, methods, are not really being rigorous with definitions. Because I mean, we could talk for ages about what OSINT is and open source information, distinctions and the different definitions. And as you also said, it all depends on the different perspectives, who you are, who you work for. Because if you don't have anyone to produce some intelligence for, then is it really OSINT? But also the other point I really liked,
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, if you do it in a formal definition, it would be like an intelligence requirement. But I do think that journalists today, a lot of them are doing OSINT, and they have made their own requirements. One of the examples I would use is Ben Dow. I mean, he obviously has his own requirements. They obviously deal with human rights issues at Iraq and Awesome. So I do think that requirements exist, but the outside of the intelligence community. But I also think that if you just put up, a research methodology or a tactic or a trick, that's not OSINT. That's a part of it. That's a part of the trade craft.
No, so absolutely agree. That's true. And you also talked about ethics, which is also another big area. And as you rightly said, I mean, anyone can do whatever they want, kind of like. So we are not, how to phrase this, not to step on any toes. Basically that, there's no there's no barrier if you want to enter the world of OSINT. So there's no one who says you are allowed to do this or you're not allowed to do this, unless you break any laws, of course, in the country or city. But what are your thoughts on kind of like, trying to, come up with some standards or guidelines or best practices?
I actually do have some thoughts on that. One is to kind of look at it. As I said, I'm volunteering right now with the IEEE SA Open under the MAC group doing research in OSINT. And IEEE has a lot of OSINT products and projects underneath it. It's a really big organization. IEEE SA Open, one of the things that they do is they vet somebody's open source program before they decide to even help them. If it's not ethical, if it's not something that goes in the mission or vision, they're not going to do it. Fivecast, which is an OSINT company, I saw Fivecast has their own little ethical guidelines on their company, and I really wish that all OSINT companies would do that so that the audience knows what their ethical guidelines are. And because there's not transparency with a lot of programs and tools, because either people just don't think about it, they'll just slap something on GitHub and they don't put what their guidelines are. Or you'll have a company that'll have a rocking awesome program, but they won't say what their ethical guidelines are. Or and if you look at, sometimes that can really lash back. I mean, if you look at, it wasn't OSINT, but if you look at what happened with the Pegasus software and Israel, is they didn't, that to me was very unethical. And if you look at their website, there wasn't any clear ethical guidelines that were provided for their product. So I think that's something that I hope gets discussed more within OSINT communities, and it would be nice to see like a process where people look at it and they say, okay, this is how can be used for good. And there's so many examples of OSINT for good. Amnesty International has that video tool that's OSINT for good. Trace Labs does OSINT for good. All these Micah's tool can be used for lots of OSINT for good. The What's My Name app, that's used all the time to help find missing people. So there's all these things out here that can be used for good. I think the things that are being used for good, or that have kind of a ethical shine to them, and they should be highlighted, and
I think one of the biggest challenges with ethics is that is the differences in the world, right? I mean, your ethics over here in the United States, or actually in the Washington, D.C. area, are going to be different than those in Asia, in the Middle East, in Australia, based upon what's allowed here, what's taboo here, what is legally allowed. I think there is some level of commonality that we can come to. But over the years, I've tried to figure out, what would be like an ethical framework for the use and release and publishing of open source intelligence tools, techniques, and even, blogs. And I've had the hardest time trying to figure that out, just because everybody comes from different cultures. Everybody has different pressures on them.
Opinions.
Yeah, and different things. And so I don't think that we'll ever get to necessarily a common ethics base, but I think there are a few commonalities that we could probably all agree on when we're releasing things.
Absolutely. And I don't think you're going to get congruence on everything across all OSINTers from all countries. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Yeah. But I do think that having that dialogue, or to be able to look at a tool as, hey, this tool to me has more credibility because up front, bluff, they've put what their ethics or their considerations are. Yeah. I mean, and if somebody misuses it, at least they've said, I would like you not to use it this way.
Yeah.
Yet sometimes there is a lot of deception to companies that claim to be transparent. And we cannot avoid that either. It's like we try to reach a perfect solution, but then there are so many little details that are important along the way. For example, claiming that you're transparent and ethical, and then doing something completely different behind closed doors, and there is no way for the public to know what is happening. Although we have networks, we are a small community, we know one another pretty well. So in the end, I feel that there is a way for the truth to come out, but it's challenging.
There's also so much we can do as individuals, but I think, we can say, like, by sharing on Twitter, on other social media platforms, specific techniques and methods, we also have the responsibility of not sharing anything that kind of like violates whatever ethics guidelines we stick to. And so maybe you can also talk about this, Sarah, but I'm sure Christina has also the same dilemmas. Like in the area that you specialize in, there are certain things that you don't want to share. You don't want specific groups to know about these techniques. And especially when it comes to terrorist content online, I mean, biggest challenge for lots of companies, tech companies, is to remove terrorist content, smaller tech companies especially. And by putting it out through my Twitter account to just point out a technique, I'm kind of like, doing the opposite, helping them to spread their propaganda just by pointing out, hey, I'm monitoring the channels and I found this. Look at this, how cool I am. This is like always my dilemma. I find interesting stuff, but I can't share it. So
that has changed a lot since 2001, 2002. Because I watched, from 2001, when I first started looking at terrorist websites, there was two big English websites that had like terrorist URL lists. One was a professor at MIT and he did it as a hobby, and he worked in computer science, and he also had a whole section of his site dedicated to toilets around the world, which was really, really weird. And then another
Did you say terrorist?
Yeah. He had a comprehensive encyclopedia or comprehensive links list or directory of everything from like EZLN to FARC to Al Qaeda to Hamas to Hezbollah to just ongoing. And it was several, at that time it was a few hundred links. So it was pretty impressive for 2001. And then there was another one. And then, but like, I think I might have, I'm sure I wasn't the first person to do paper and beheading videos. I'm not proud of doing paper and beheading videos. It's not fun. But when I did a paper on beheading videos, at that point there wasn't any open source publications really on beheading videos, and it wasn't a lot of fun to watch. But I remember at that time, saying these should be taken offline. And it was really interesting because back then the response was, no, that's freedom of speech by some people. And it's like, no, that's not freedom of speech. I mean, at least to me, that's not. That's 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 really, really bad. And I actually called a few tech companies and said, hey, you shouldn't have this video of this person being executed on your site. And at that time there was a debate about, well, I can't take it down because it's not violating any of our rules. And I mean that who was it? Oh, in the UK, Abu Hamza Misri, when his site was operating and he had like this little video game on one of the things on his site, and he had like some other stuff on there. At that point, when you complained about it, the response was, well, it falls under freedom of speech. So since that time, and that was at the Finsbury Park Mosque, but since that time, that's evolved and changed where we now actually have rules and regulations, and you have whole entire organizations set up now to mitigate this stuff, whereas back then you did not. As far as figuring out where that line is of how somebody can use something, 2000, and I think it was 2008, I did like this draft report. It even had some grammar errors in it, and it was a draft on anomalous uses of commercial off-the-shelf technologies and like platforms that Al Qaeda could use, and it was unclassified and for official use only. And part of it was terrorist use of Twitter. Well, at that point, Twitter wasn't really that popular, and it was a product I made for the 304th MIBN, but Twitter wasn't that popular. And somehow somebody from Fast and Wired posted that draft report on their websites, and it went and got reposted in other places. But there was one security analyst who made a really good point about that, and his point, and it was Bruce
Hoffman.
Schneider.
Bruce, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought Bruce Hoffman.
And he said, well, this isn't that interesting because anybody can use anything if it's available. And I think he used what was it? Can opener as an example. Yeah, he's right. That's the whole point. I mean, if you have, 911, people use box cutters. So the point is with that is if it's something that somebody intuitively can do, chances are somebody can already figure it out. Or if it's something that is, a piece of software that's already online, maybe they don't notice it then. But if somebody has access to it, it's open, then everybody has access to it.
Yeah, I mean, technology is a double-edged sword. It can be used and it can be also exploited at the same time. That's the problem. Right.
And you mentioned the can opener example, and it's such a good analogy. We haven't done this with tools on the internet yet, but for example, the knife, as long as you use a knife in the kitchen to cut vegetables, it is classified as a kitchen utensil. As long as you use it to kill someone, it's classified as a weapon.
Right.
So its use has been regulated in a sense, and this difference in classification is what makes all the difference.
Yeah, but then it gets even more complicated when you because the regulation is a very good point. There needs to be things regulated, but also defined what constitutes a terrorist group, etc. But then when you move into some technologies that are difficult to regulate or impossible to regulate, then this is the era that we are entering now or have entered already, when with technologies like decentralization, a decentralized web, and all these technologies that blockchains, for instance, the finance, terrorist finance. We spoke about this in our last podcast with Jessica Davis, but also the idea of not storing terrorist content on a server, but on kind of like multiple computers that are part of a decentralized network, so it's impossible to take it down. Basically, we've got this already, BitTorrent network and illegal movies and film piracy and that kind of stuff. It already exists, but we can see that terrorist groups are adapting and using these technologies more and more to be more resilient, which is a big problem.
I actually did a paper on something very similar to that. It was years ago, but it was on improvised online communications by terrorist networks, and it was just a academic paper I did for a presentation. It has evolved, but a lot of the things that were being used back then, surprisingly, are still being used now. So I mean, the tried and true methods, some of those are still operational or in use. I think the concept of the Fediverse, though, or the decentralized networks or nodes, is if somebody is using the established Fediverse, is even though there isn't like a content moderator like you would have on Facebook, there are people that put out lists saying we don't like these URLs on the Fediverse, so stay away from them. And they're persona non grata. I've seen at least one of those so far. So I mean, I don't know if that's solution or a good risk mitigation measure, but it's obvious that people are thinking about it in Fediverse.
No, that's an interesting point. Again, to our listeners, follow Sarah on Twitter. Her handle is @UnleashedOSINT, and also make sure to check out the Places OSINT news portal. The link is provided in the description. I can't talk anymore. Yeah, perfect, cool. Christina, do you have any other questions?
No, I'm processing what you said, though, and it really is interesting. It's a very useful perspective to have here on the podcast. And thank you really for sharing all that.
Yeah.
I don't know what else. I will probably come up with questions right after based on processing what you have said.
Yeah, no worries. So what we usually do, we go into these interviews and then we ask one question, which is about the career, and then we just take it from there. So that's why it's like kind of like freestyle. And moving away from the terrorist use of the internet, which is a big and very interesting topic in itself. Maybe we can move back to your career and the career and your decisions that you took to come, to the position that you have right now. Because some of our listeners, I'm asking because some of our listeners are new to the OSINT field, and they might need some career advice. So, in terms of how to find an OSINT job or what skills they should have to get an OSINT position, is there anything you would recommend?
And another point on what Laurent said, in some organizations or in some areas of the world, they don't even know what OSINT is or why it would be useful for their organization. I believe you might have come across this challenge earlier on in your career. So maybe you would also want to talk about that, because OSINT is relatively new as a job.
Yeah.
When I first started doing OSINT, it wasn't called OSINT. I mean, but that's what I was doing. And it evolved to where it was being called OSINT when I changed projects. But OSINT actually has been around for quite some time. If you look at it, you had for example, the United States government, we looked at news media and things like that when it was on newspaper and print. So OSINT didn't just come around with the internet, even though calling it OSINT and stressing that has, I think, evolved more since the World Wide Web. One of my friends who's old school OSINT, when I was teaching at Fort Huachuca, he would take me out dumpster diving, get old school trash OSINT. So, I mean, that's
fun.
Yeah, that's fun. Kind of smelly, but fun.
Yeah.
But for anybody getting in the field, what I would say is that it used to be something that was primarily for the governments. I think that journalists, also investigative journalists, do OSINT. It's just that they didn't call it OSINT, even though it is OSINT. And I think that as you have this shrinking global village, or Marshall McLuhan kind of ideology dealing with media channels, is more and more people that are not government or not news media need OSINT, and that's apparent from like things like human rights investigations. There's so many organizations that use OSINT to help save other human beings. And so if you're getting into it as a field, I think you need to look at it as it's not limiting or pigeonholing you to just national defense. You can do OSINT and work for a human rights organization. You can do OSINT and work for a news media outlet. You could do OSINT and do corporate business intelligence. So the first thing I would say is to look at all these different possibilities that you have for applying that skill set.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is to understand that although the technologies are always changing, that the actual concept behind it has been around for a really long time.
This is a very good point, and especially the fact of finding out a way to utilize what OSINT is doing within the scope and the goals of the company you work for. And introducing it step by step this way. And also you are right in the fact that it has been existing for a very long time, not under this name, under different names, but the purpose is the same everywhere.
Yeah.
One thing that I've noticed that has changed a lot since when I started doing OSINT type research in 2001 is there's a lot more sensitivity now to your analysts. And that didn't exist when I started doing OSINT. There was no such concept as vicarious trauma. It was, you're going to go look at this bad website and that's it. Work's over, go home, that kind of thing. So I think that now it's a better environment in a way to do OSINT in, because more people are paying attention to how it impacts somebody's work life and their personal life. Yeah, that's another thing I thought was interesting.
Yeah,
that's a very important topic as well. We had Nicole Beckwith on the podcast exactly discussing mental health and what happens after an investigation or during an investigation, and how do you prepare mentally to handle what's going on, because it's not like you go to work, do some research on a murder or who knows what, and then you go home and sleep. It just doesn't happen.
I do laughter yoga.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do. It's awesome. I do laughter yoga. I love laughter yoga. I have a Japanese laughter yoga sensei, and I am a trained laughter yoga leader.
Oh, that's great.
Well, that's amazing. I guess for our listeners, if you want to read more on this topic, check out the podcast that Christina mentioned with
Nicole Beckwith.
Nicole Beckwith with Christina, and also Nico. He also wrote a blog post on this very issue called Vicarious Trauma. And he then also talks about a couple of things that what you can do also based on his experience. And yeah, these are great starting points. And I think there are also lots of organizations that are now dedicated to this topic, offering help and support. And so go and check this out. And before we conclude this interview, I just want to point out one last time her Sarah's social. So follow her on Twitter. Her handle is @UnleashedOSINT. And also check out the Places OSINT news portal. Link is in the description. And yeah, before we conclude this and go for dinner or lunch, there's one last question that we ask everyone. So the question is, what is the next thing that you want to learn?
Within, OSINT.
Oh gosh,
Exactly, within OSINT.
I consistently am trying to learn new things. I started off more on the research side of the house versus the coding side of the house. So I've started working on trying to pick up some of the coding stuff. So that's the part that I would like to work on, as far as like some of the things I'd like to learn is how to do better coding, and some of the IT stuff, I think. And there's, of course, tradecraft is always evolving, so I always want to keep up to date with whatever the newest tools, or how to use those tools with different kinds of recipes, and looking at computing hypotheses, and can I use it to make an association matrix? And I love doing stuff like that too, but I definitely would like to learn more coding.
Yeah, cool.
It's a very good mindset to have as well, because the field keeps evolving, and we stay curious. So I think that's why we have the name OSINT Curious. You have to have this trait in you.
That's a very good point, Christina. A very nice one to also end this interview. Stay OSINT curious. So, Sarah, thank you again so much for coming on our podcast, sharing your experience, and also sharing all this and having this discussion with us. Really much appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Many good points to keep from this presentation.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it. And we'll see you on the social media platforms that you have.
And to all our listeners, if you like this show, please like and share it. And also listen to all our other episodes and check out our blog posts. You can find everything on OSINT Curious.us. Always so difficult.
I know.
All right. Bye, guys. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.